There's a trench in France that modern soldiers won't patrol after dark. Why? Because over 100 years ago, something happened there that still hasn't been explained. In 1917, an entire platoon vanished in Sector 14 of the Somme. No bodies, no trace, just gone. But here, that's what they do and tell you in history. Class soldiers today still report hearing the same screams that were recorded the night they disappeared. I found the declassified audio. You're about to hear it. My name is John, and what I'm about to share with you isn't folklore. It's documented military history that's been sitting in classified archives for over a century. And after you hear what I uncovered, you'll understand why some trenches are marked restricted to this day. To understand what happened in Sector 14, you first need to understand the Somme itself. The Battle of the Somme, fought in 1916, was one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. Over 1 million men were wounded or killed in just 5 months. The battlefield stretched across 15 miles of French countryside. And when the guns finally fell silent, the land was different. Soldiers who served there described it as hell on earth, not because of the enemy, not because of the artillery, but because of what the war did to the land itself. The constant shelling turned the ground into a graveyard you could see from the surface. Bodies, sometimes just pieces of bodies, were everywhere, embedded in trench walls, floating in shell craters filled with rainwater, and the smell. Veterans said you could smell the Somme from 3 miles away. But it wasn't just the dead that haunted the trenches. Men reported hearing voices in no man's land when no one was there. Shadows that moved against the direction of the flares. And worst of all, footsteps in abandoned sections of the trench that stopped the moment you turned the corner. High command dismissed it as shell shock. Battle fatigue. The mind is playing tricks after weeks of sustained combat, until Sector 14. On the night of March 19, 1917, 2nd Lieutenant James Cartwright was ordered to take his platoon 32 men from the 8th Battalion, Royal Fusiliers, into Sector 14 for a routine patrol. Routine, that's what the orders said. But Sector 14 was anything but routine. This section of trench had been abandoned 3 months earlier after heavy German bombardment. It was too close to enemy lines to repair, too damaged to defend, and officially listed as non-operational on British maps. So why send a platoon there? According to declassified documents I found at the Imperial War Museum, High Command had received reports of movement in Sector 14. Observers claimed to see lights, hear digging. Some even reported German voices. They thought it was a tunnel operation. The Germans were digging underneath British lines to plant explosives. Lieutenant Cartwright and his men were sent to investigate. They entered the trench at 2100 hours 9 p.m. Their orders were simple: sweep the sector, report any enemy activity, and return by midnight. At 2147 hours, Cartwright sent a runner back with a message. It was brief, 4 words written on a scrap of paper that still exists in the archives. Something wrong here? Investigating? That was the last anyone heard from them. When the runner returned to Sector 14 with reinforcements at 0200 hours, the trench was empty. Completely empty. No bodies. No blood. No signs of combat. The men had simply vanished. So what could make 32 soldiers disappear without a trace? The British Army launched an immediate investigation. Search parties combed Sector 14 for 3 days straight, found equipment trifles still leaning against trench walls, helmets scattered in the mud, even a half-eaten tin of corned beef sitting on a fire step. But no soldiers. No bodies in no man's land, no prisoners taken by the Germans. They checked through Red Cross channels. No one had deserted. These men had simply ceased to exist. The official report, filed on March 25, 1917, concluded that the platoon must have been hit by a direct artillery strike that obliterated all remains. But here's the problem with that theory. There was no artillery bombardment that night. 0 shelling reported by either side. The front was completely quiet, so the report was amended. The new official cause: lost to enemy action, details unknown. Case closed, except it wasn't. Because 3 weeks later, a corporal from the 12th Lancashire Fusiliers was doing overnight sentry duty near Sector 14 when he heard something that made his blood run cold. Screaming. Not the screaming of wounded men, not German soldiers. These were screams coming from inside the abandoned trench. Dozens of voices, overlapping, pleading, and then, just as suddenly as they started, silence. The corporal reported it to his commanding officer, who told him to keep his mouth shut and wrote it off his nerves. But it happened again and again and again. By April 1917, soldiers stationed near Sector 14 were refusing sentry duty. Officers threatened court-martial. Some men took it. They'd rather face a firing squad than spend a night listening to what came out of that trench. The British Army's solution? They sealed Sector 14, officially abandoned it, removed it from patrol routes, and ordered every man in the battalion never to speak of it again. For 60 years, it worked. In 1977, French construction crew was preparing to build a memorial near the Somme when they discovered something buried in the collapsed remains of a British command dugout. A field telephone recording device. These were rare pieces of equipment used by British intelligence to record German communications intercepted from captured phone lines. Most were destroyed or lost during the war. But this one survived, and it still had a wax cylinder inside. The French government turned it over to military historians who carefully restored the recording. What they heard didn't make any sense. The recording was dated March 19, 1917. The same night, the platoon vanished. And it captured 14 minutes of audio from inside Sector 14. I'm going to play a portion of it for you now. Be warned, this is the actual declassified recording. What you're about to hear is real. Sir, there's no one here. The whole sector's empty. Keep moving. Check every bay. Do you hear that? The hell is fallback. Fall back now. What were those men running from? You might think that's where the story ends. A tragic mystery from a war fought over a century ago. But Sector 14 is still there. People still go near it. In 2001, British military historian named Dr. Michael Harrington received permission to survey the old trench systems for a documentary. His team included 2 cameramen, a sound engineer, and a French military liaison. They spent 3 days mapping the trenches with ground-penetrating radar, looking for collapsed tunnels or mass graves that might explain the disappearance. On the 3rd day, they decided to stay after dark to get nighttime footage. At 9:47 p.m., almost exactly 84 years to the minute after, Lieutenant Cartwright's platoon entered the trench. Their equipment started malfunctioning. Cameras drained of battery in seconds. The radar system shut down completely. And then their sound engineer, a man named Paul Greaves, stopped dead in his tracks. He was wearing professional headphones, monitoring ambient sound for the documentary. According to Dr. Harrington's account, which he gave in a 2003 interview, Greaves went white as a sheet, ripped off his headphones and said, "We need to leave, right now." When asked what he heard, Greaves refused to answer. He packed up his equipment, climbed out of the trench, and walked back to their vehicle. He quit the production the next day and has never spoken publicly about what happened. But Dr. Harrington did speak about it. In that same 2003 interview, he said something that still gives me chills. Whatever happened in Sector 14 in 1917, still happening? I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's psychological, environmental, or something we don't have words for. But that place is wrong, and it knows when you're there. The French government now restricts access to Sector 14. Officially, it's because of unexploded ordnance, leftover shells and grenades that make the area dangerous. But locals know the real reason. They call it La Tranchée Day, Chris, the Trench of Screams. So what actually happened to Lieutenant Cartwright and his 32 men? Over the years, researchers have proposed dozens of theories. Theory 1. German tunnel attack? Maybe the Germans had dug a tunnel under Sector 14, planted explosives, and detonated them when the platoon was inside, burying the men alive. But ground-penetrating radar found no evidence of German tunnels in that sector. And there's still no explanation for the screams heard weeks later. Theory 2. Chemical weapons. Some historians believe the men were exposed to an experimental German gas that caused mass hallucinations and panic. Maybe they fled into no man's land and were killed by machine gun fire, their bodies lost in the mud. But chemical weapons leave traces. They leave bodies. The recording doesn't match exposure to any known gas used in WW1. Theory 3. Mass hysteria. This is the official theory. The stress of war, combined with the horrific conditions of the Somme, caused a psychological break. The men panicked, scattered, and died in ways that left no recoverable remains. Except mass hysteria doesn't explain the recording. It doesn't explain why modern visitors experience the exact same phenomena. And it certainly doesn't explain why the French military still keeps the area restricted over 100 years later. There's one more theory, one that historians don't like to talk about. Theory 4. Something was already there. The Somme wasn't just a battlefield. It was a graveyard built on top of older graveyards. The land had seen violence for thousands of years, Roman battles, medieval sieges, and plague pits from the Black Death. Some researchers believe that the sheer scale of death during WW1, over 1 million casualties concentrated in one small area, created something, opened something. Really something that had been sleeping in that soil for centuries. I'm not saying I believe that, but I am saying this. When you have 32 men vanish without a trace, when you have audio recordings of their final moments, when you have a century of consistent reports from trained soldiers and researchers, all describing the same unexplainable phenomena, at some point, you have to consider that maybe, just maybe, there are things that happen in those trenches that we're not meant to understand. Sector 14 of the Somme is still there. You can find it on maps if you know where to look. There's no memorial, no marker. Just a stretch of overgrown land that nobody goes near after dark. The French government maintains the unexploded ordnance story. But talk to the locals. Talk to the farmers who work the fields nearby. They'll tell you the truth. They'll tell you about the nights when the wind carries sounds that don't belong to any living thing. About the lights that move through the old trench lines when no one's there. About the feeling that settles over you when you get too close to the overwhelming certainty that you're being watched. And they'll tell you one more thing. Every year, on March 19th, at exactly 9 p.m., you can hear them. 32 voices, screaming, pleading, trying desperately to warn anyone who'll listen. Stay away from Sector 14 because whatever took those men in 1917, it's still hungry. If this story sent chills down your spine, you need to hear what I uncovered next. There's another location from W2, a place where Allied soldiers reported seeing something so terrifying, the military buried the evidence for 80 years. That video is coming next. Top 7 scariest moments in WW2 you never learned in school. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, because what I'm about to show you makes Sector 14 look like a ghost story. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Till next time, stay curious, stay safe, and whatever you do, don't go looking for Sector 14.